At first glance, she didn't look like someone anyone should fear. Sitting alone at the long metal table in the mess hall, her posture was relaxed, almost casual, as if she were just another quiet veteran passing time between meals. Her hair was tied back simply, her uniform worn but clean, showing signs of long service rather than decoration. To the untrained eye, she blended into the background. No loud laughter, no group around her, no visible rank demanding attention. That was exactly why she was underestimated. People saw silence and mistook it for weakness. They saw calm and assumed submission. What they didn't see were the years etched into her discipline, the battles that had reshaped her nerves, or the kind of resolve that doesn't need to announce itself. The group that noticed her that day made the same fatal mistake. They watched her sit there alone and decided she was an easy target, someone who wouldn't push back, someone who would shrink under pressure. In their minds, a female veteran without visible authority symbols was fair game for intimidation. They didn't consider why she sat alone by choice, or why her eyes occasionally scanned the room with quiet awareness. They didn't recognize the signs of someone who had learned to stay composed in far more dangerous environments than a crowded mess hall. As they closed in around her table, their presence was meant to dominate. Chairs scraped loudly, bodies leaned too close, voices dropped into mocking tones. The intent was clear: surround, isolate, assert control. Yet she didn't flinch. She didn't reach for help or raise her voice. Instead, she slowly set down her utensils, wiped her hands with deliberate care, and looked up, meeting their stares one by one. There was no fear in her eyes, only a steady, unreadable calm. That calm unsettled them more than anger would have. They were expecting resistance or embarrassment, not composure. Inside her mind, memories flickered. Long nights overseas, hostile terrain, moments when panic would have meant death. Compared to those moments, this was nothing. She had learned long ago that reacting too quickly often gave power away. Real strength was knowing when to stay still, when to let others expose themselves. Every word they spoke, every step closer they took, only confirmed what she already knew. They had no idea who they were dealing with. To the room, she was just a quiet woman being cornered, but beneath that surface was a veteran who had survived pressure most people couldn't imagine. She understood hierarchy, consequences, and the unspoken rules of military honor. She also knew that sometimes the strongest move was patience. While they believed they had the upper hand, the truth was far different. This moment wasn't about her proving herself, it was about letting their ignorance run its course, right up until it collided with something far bigger than they expected. The mess hall was never meant to be a battleground, yet on that day it carried the weight of one. Long rows of steel tables stretched beneath harsh fluorescent lights, the air thick with the clatter of trays, low conversations, and the unspoken rules of military order. It was a shared space where rank usually softened and discipline was maintained through mutual respect. Everyone knew that what happened here was visible, witnessed, and remembered. That was precisely why the confrontation mattered. Anything done in this room was never truly private, and everyone understood the risks of crossing lines in such a place. As the group tightened their circle around her table, the surrounding noise subtly shifted. Conversations nearby faded, not completely, but just enough for awareness to ripple through the room. Heads turned, eyes lingered. No one intervened yet, but many sensed something was wrong. A mess hall confrontation carried a different kind of tension. This wasn't a dark alley or a locker room. This was neutral ground, where behavior reflected not only on individuals, but on the culture of the unit itself. Every move was being silently judged.
The aggressors leaned into that environment, mistaking visibility for safety. They believed that in a public space consequences would be softened, that nothing serious would happen under so many watching eyes. Their confidence fed on the idea that authority was distant and that embarrassment, not discipline, was the worst outcome. They spoke just loudly enough to assert dominance, yet quietly enough to maintain plausible deniability. It was a calculated performance designed to humiliate without triggering immediate intervention. She remained seated, centered within the circle they formed, acutely aware of the weight of the setting. The mess hall demanded restraint, and she respected that. Any reaction she gave would echo far beyond the moment. She understood how quickly stories traveled on base, how a single incident could redefine reputations. This wasn't just about defending herself, It was about preserving the dignity expected in a military space. Her stillness wasn't hesitation, it was discipline shaped by years of operating under scrutiny. The tension grew heavier with each passing second. Trays paused mid-air. Someone at a nearby table shifted uncomfortably. The mess hall's openness made everything sharper. The scrape of boots on tile, the rustle of fabric, the controlled breathing of those standing too close. The confrontation had crossed an invisible line, one that everyone in uniform instinctively recognized. This was no longer casual harassment, it was a challenge issued in full view of the community. By choosing the mess hall, the aggressors had unknowingly raised the stakes. They had placed themselves under the unforgiving spotlight of military tradition and accountability. Any outcome would be witnessed, discussed, and remembered. The space itself demanded resolution, not chaos. As the silence stretched, it became clear that whatever happened next would not stay contained. In a place built on order and respect, disorder never went unanswered. It only waited for the right authority to arrive. The shift in the room was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, like a pressure change before a storm. It began not with a voice, but with movement. A single tray was set down at a distant table, slower than necessary, deliberate. Boots stopped mid-step. The men surrounding her were too focused on their own sense of control to notice it immediately, but others did. Several veterans straightened unconsciously, their instincts reacting before their minds caught up. Something had changed, and those who had spent time around real authority could feel it in their bones. He didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. He entered the mess hall with the quiet certainty of someone who had never learned to seek permission from a room. His posture was relaxed, almost unremarkable, yet every movement was precise. No wasted motion, no hesitation. His uniform was plain, free of flashy indicators, but the way he carried himself spoke louder than medals ever could. This was a man accustomed to command without raising his voice. As he walked closer, conversations died out entirely. Even the aggressors felt it then, though they couldn't explain why. Their laughter thinned, their shoulders stiffened. One of them glanced over his shoulder, irritation flashing across his face, until his eyes met the newcomer. Whatever he saw there drained the color from his expression. This wasn't fear born of rank alone. It was recognition, primal and immediate, the kind that came from understanding hierarchy at its deepest level. The man stopped a few steps behind the group, close enough that his presence pressed against them like a wall. He didn't touch anyone. He didn't need to. His silence did the work. Slowly, deliberately, he spoke her name. Just once. Calm, controlled, familiar. That single word changed everything. The circle around her fractured instantly as bodies shifted aside, not out of courtesy, but instinct. No one wanted to be between a Navy SEAL and someone he had claimed with that tone. She looked up at him then, and for the first time since the situation began, her expression softened. Not relief, trust. The kind built over shared hardship, unspoken understanding, and years of earned respect. He met her eyes briefly, giving the slightest nod, a silent question, "Are you all right?" She answered with an almost imperceptible nod of her own. That was all that was needed. He finally addressed the men who had surrounded her. His voice was low, even, devoid of threat, and somehow that made it worse. There was no anger to negotiate with, no emotion to provoke, just certainty. He reminded them calmly where they were, what this space represented, what it meant to dishonor a veteran, especially one who had earned her place long before any of them. Each word landed with surgical precision, stripping away their confidence piece.
By the time he finished speaking, no one doubted who controlled the room. The mess hall hadn't erupted into chaos or violence. It didn't need to. Authority had arrived, undeniable and absolute. And the men who had thought themselves powerful now understood a hard truth. They hadn't just crossed a line, they had crossed a legend. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't make threats, he didn't even shift his stance dramatically, yet the air around him was charged, heavy with unspoken consequences. Every aggressor in the mess hall felt it immediately, the kind of presence that fills a space without taking it up, the kind that demands attention simply because it exists. There was a difference between fear and respect, and he wielded the latter effortlessly.
They could sense it in the way he moved, the way his gaze scanned the room, and the calm authority in his posture. It was silent, controlled, and utterly terrifying in its own understated way. The men who had encircled the female veteran tried to maintain their bravado, shoving shoulders and muttering threats, but their words faltered. Their confidence began to crumble under the weight of someone who had been trained to read behavior like a book. He didn't need to act aggressively to demonstrate his superiority. Every tiny observation he made, every subtle gesture, conveyed that he was fully aware of their intentions and had the ability to neutralize them in an instant. It was the ultimate control, dominance without spectacle. Even the other veterans in the room felt it. The mess hall, usually noisy and chaotic, had fallen into a near silence. Trays paused mid-air, conversations died, and everyone instinctively stepped back, creating an invisible bubble around the central confrontation. No one wanted to be caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. The SEAL's presence alone re-established order, a reminder that discipline and authority don't always need to be loudly enforced, they are felt. The female veteran herself didn't flinch or hide behind him. Instead, she remained seated with her back straight, her eyes steady. The unspoken message was clear. She didn't need rescuing, but she was no longer alone. That combination, the calm of the veteran and the controlled menace of the SEAL, made the aggressor's bravado seem absurd. They had assumed she was weak, and their ignorance had brought them face to face with someone whose experience and skill rendered their threats meaningless. His silence spoke louder than any shout ever could. It communicated judgment, authority, and the inevitability of consequence. The aggressors' minds raced, trying to calculate escape routes, excuses, or justification, but each calculation was slow, clumsy, inadequate. The control he exercised was absolute, because it didn't rely on force, it relied on presence, expertise, and the unshakable confidence of someone who had been tested in situations far more dangerous than this. Every second that passed without him acting increased their anxiety. The message was clear: one wrong move, and the outcome would be theirs to regret. By the time he took a single step forward, the aggressors were already defeated mentally. They knew they had crossed a line, and that any further arrogance would be met with precision, not chaos. The SEAL's mastery of silent authority ensured that violence was unnecessary. He didn't have to strike to command respect. He simply embodied it. And in that moment, everyone in the mess hall learned the same lesson. True power often comes not from action, but from the unshakable presence of someone who is fully in control. The moment of reckoning came quietly, but with devastating clarity. The aggressors, who had entered the mess hall brimming with confidence, now found themselves stripped of it entirely. Their earlier bravado, the whispered jokes, the mocking gestures, they all seemed absurd now, as if a curtain had lifted and revealed the true stakes of their actions. Every eye in the room watched, every breath felt heavier, and the mess hall, once neutral space for eating and casual conversation, had transformed into a stage for judgment. The authority of the Navy SEAL and the presence of the female veteran created a perfect alignment: calm, disciplined, and unassailable. They had underestimated not just the woman, but the environment itself. In military culture, disrespect, harassment, and attempts to assert dominance over someone weaker or overlooked are never truly tolerated. When the SEAL intervened, the consequences didn't need to be violent to be immediate. They were psychological, social, and absolute. Each of the men felt their miscalculations settle into their bones. They had crossed someone who could dismantle them without lifting a hand. The lesson wasn't just for them, it was a warning to anyone else in the room who might have considered similar behavior. The female veteran sat upright, her expression steady and composed. There was no visible triumph, no gloating smile, just restored dignity. She didn't need to raise her voice or fight back. Her honor had been defended by someone whose reputation alone carried weight. Her posture, her calm, and her silence spoke volumes, telling the entire mess hall that she had been respected in the way she deserved all along. Those who had sought to humiliate her now recognized the depth of their error.
They weren't merely embarrassed, they were confronted with undeniable authority and excellence. As the aggressors attempted to retreat, stumbling over excuses and half-formed justifications, the presence of the seal ensured that every action was scrutinized. There was no room for escape from accountability, no possibility of sliding under the radar. Their social standing, previously inflated by arrogance, had been stripped bare. In its place was the uncomfortable, undeniable reality that disrespect toward a veteran, especially one backed by legendary skill, carries immediate and lasting consequences. The message was clear: actions have consequences, and those consequences are swift and exacting when someone with true authority intervenes. By the time the tension in the room fully subsided, the female veteran had regained her rightful place in the eyes of everyone present. Respect was restored, not through confrontation alone, but through the demonstration of patience, control, and strategic intervention. The aggressors learned an indelible lesson about underestimating others, about the cost of arrogance, and about the fact that true power doesn't always announce itself in force. It manifests in presence, judgment, and the quiet certainty of justice. The mess call returned to its normal rhythm, but the memory of that confrontation, of the authority that had stepped in to restore order, lingered long after. Everyone present carried the reminder that honor cannot be violated without consequence, and that sometimes the strongest victories are won not with fists, but with undeniable presence and unwavering authority.